This is Uriel Epstein, Executive Director of the Renew Democracy Initiative, and today we have a little bit of a unique conversation. I'm excited to welcome one of my close friends, Patrick McGinnis, venture capitalist, writer, podcast host, and perhaps most importantly, inventor of the term FOMO, fear of missing out, which was added to the Oxford English Dictionary in 2013. He now has a new book coming out, Fear of Missing Out, Practical Decision-Making in a World of Overwhelming Choice. Patrick, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So, you're probably one of the least famous people to have invented one of the world's most famous terms. How did it happen? Where did the concept of FOMO start for you?
Well, it goes back to almost 20 years ago, actually. So a lot of people think of FOMO as something that is, from the past couple of years, but actually it goes back to the year 2003. I was entering Harvard Business School, having just moved from New York. And in the years preceding entering school, I had lived through the tech crash when the NASDAQ fell from 5,000 to about 1,300. And I was working as a venture capitalist, and basically we had to fire everybody and we lost all our money in the companies in which we invested. And I had also lived through the 9/11 attacks in New York, which I know you did as well. And so I got to Boston and I just felt like I'd been through a lot of traumatic events and that the world that I thought I knew had ended and that I really wanted to live for the moment. And a place like Harvard Business School is such a choice-rich environment. You can go for a million different options when it comes to job opportunities, lectures, classes, parties, social events, trips, you name it. And I tried to do everything. And I basically spent all of my time running around trying to participate in every event I could, to the point where I realized that I actually had an anxiety about missing out on things. I started calling it fear of missing out, and I recognized this in my classmates as well. It was really deep into the culture of the school. And so as I was graduating in 2004, I wrote an article called Social Theory at HBS, McGinnis' Two Foes, all about FOMO and another term, FOBO, or fear of a better option, that we used all of the time and that I came up with. And that was the beginning. Basically from there were a lot of convoluted ways that it spread, but the original place where it was used was in my article, and today it's in the dictionary.
So at first blush, it seems like this crisis might have actually been good for most of us who are afflicted with FOMO, because we're not actually at risk of missing out on anything. Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio are stuck in their homes just like you and I are stuck in ours. Does this sound right to you?
So it's been interesting to watch FOMO as it has evolved through the current COVID epidemic. I would say in the beginning, I remember there was a weekend where I had family in town and my mom was telling me, you need to buy toilet paper. And this was in early March. And I said, why? And she said, well, haven't you seen on the internet, people all over the world are running to the supermarket. I went to the supermarket, I bought more toilet paper than I could ever possibly use in a year. And it was amazing how everybody was just buying toilet paper. So that was a FOMO moment, as was the inability or the unwillingness of people to sort of cancel their spring break vacations right before lockdown happened. And then, of course, we got into lockdown. And for me, the beginning of quarantine was this news FOMO, where I was checking the news incessantly until I realized how poor I felt because of all of the negative things I was reading, right? And then there was this honeymoon where everything stopped and we were stuck in our homes and we were asked to stay home, of course, to support the social distancing and the flattening of the curve. And I and many people that I know really enjoyed the lack of external pressure. We read the books we've been meaning to read and we watched the shows and we did things. It was sort of like this extended weekend where you get caught up on all the things you've been meaning to do. And that, I think, for me personally, lasted about 3 weeks. And then I woke up one day and I was talking to somebody and I realized I had nothing to say to them. And I realized that nothing new was happening in my life. And then I looked out the window and I thought, I have a new type of FOMO, much more profound perhaps than I had expected to have, which was this FOMO around the life that I should be leading right now, that I should be able to go to a store or get on the subway, and that, of course, I'm not doing that. And I think that's the real profound type of FOMO we're feeling, is this feeling around the lives that we should be leading. And at the same time, I think a lot of people are feeling these pressures to maintain their social life on Zoom. And so it's been interesting just watching. I had like 4 Zoom things one night and I found it kind of stressful. So it's been a weird time. I think all of us just need to sort of be easy on ourselves. And the good news is, I believe that when this ends, much like I experienced in 2001, when we can get back to normal, we're going to feel a deep sense of wanting to live for the moment and to do as many things as we can. And I think that's okay, because that will show that we once again have something to miss out on again.
So I think that makes sense. And you also talked about the other term that you created while you were at business school, FOBO, fear of better options. And it seems to me like this one might actually be even more relevant for the pandemic. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what role you think that this fear is playing in our national crisis.
Yeah, so FOBO has really interesting implications in the public sphere and decision making by our public servants and by governments and by companies. But it's funny, right before the pandemic, it was in February, I wrote a piece for Politico all about the Democratic primary and how Democratic voters were feeling FOMO because they had this large panel, or large slate of people that they could vote for, all of which were, perfectly fine candidates. And when you have FOBO, basically what's happening is you are trying to decide between a number of options, all of which are acceptable options. You could choose them, but you are waiting for something better to come along, and therefore you are disinclined to make a choice. You want to wait for more data. You want to delay decision making and keep all your options open for as long as possible. And that's what Democratic voters were doing. And as you'll notice, the minute the pandemic hit, people just said, okay, this is too important. Let's just pick somebody and move on because we've got to get going, right? It just seemed trivial all of a sudden. Now, what happened with COVID and the onset of the pandemic also was FOBO, because you had public servants and decision makers who had options on the table that were acceptable options. They could take different steps. But instead of being decisive and saying, we're going to start social distancing, we're going to start lockdown right now, they wanted that little piece of data. Let's wait for some more data. Let's see how things can go. Let's see if something better comes along. And so therefore, they delayed decision-making in many places. And it's interesting because what we see from this is that the people who were decisive, whether it's in other countries or whether it's here, or a Mike DeWine or a Gavin Newsom or an Andrew Cuomo, people who are the earlier and provided that leadership, people have flocked to them, and they've actually seen tremendous support, and their approvals have gone up. People who delayed, people who wanted to wait for the rosier scenario, and you can pick your choice on that one, they have seen that people don't trust them. And so it's been incredible to watch FOBO play out because the implications here are so high. And the thing is, and this is the part that's so important, is when we have FOBO, we tend to believe that we have a set of options, and if we wait, we will get additional options, but our existing options will stay there and we will have them. But of course, the longer we wait, it may be that we lose some of the options we had earlier, and therefore our set of options is actually worse.
Let's broaden this out. As citizens of a democracy, we play a role in the choices that our government makes. So what processes do you think that we as individuals can adopt to make more effective political choices?
Yeah, it goes back to, let's think about the Democratic primary where there was so much indecision. It's hard to remember because so much has happened since that time. But if you look at the statistics in the primaries, it was a good thing. I think it's great that there were so many candidates. That's positive. We want that. But at the same time, there was so much indecision because, number one, people are overwhelmed with data. Number two, the media spins a lot of different tales, and so it's hard to know exactly what the facts are. And number three is the decision-making process, like the amount of debates, the number of people on the stage, the inability to get out clear messages. Like, it ended up being a place where instead of providing better information that would allow people to make decisions, they were not provided that. Of course, it is incumbent upon citizens to do their own homework. And so at the end of the day, decision-making is a process whereby we use facts and information to remove fear and uncertainty and then allow us to use our intuition. When you take out fear and uncertainty and then give the intuition the information it needs, the intuition can do the work that it should do. And so that's what we need to do in our decision-making around political processes, around public policy, and that needs to start at the citizens. And then if citizens are making those kinds of decisions, they're going to demand that of their public servants as well.
And so that's something that we should all as individuals be thinking about. But I remember when you and I talked a few weeks back, we talked about how those types of processes could be more effectively encouraged at the national level or the state level or the local level in any number of different elections or processes for choosing policies and so on. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how democratic innovations like ranked choice voting can help address FOBO.
Most definitely. And I love ranked choice voting. When I read about it, I thought to myself, these people have figured out how to cure FOBO. And I'm from the state of Maine. We're the first state to really embrace ranked choice voting throughout the entire sort of electoral cycle. And what's really interesting is when we have FOBO, part of the issue, a large part of what's happening is that we are unwilling to let go of the road that we cannot take. So when we choose one thing, we cannot choose all of the other things that we could potentially choose, right? And that's the issue. And what happens with ranked choice voting, which is so attractive to voters, is that you are able to rank and say, here's my first choice, here's my second choice. And then when votes are tabulated, basically you go through, and if nobody gets 50%, the bottom vote getter is eliminated and their votes are reapportioned to the second choice of those people who had voted for that person. And so as a voter, it allows me to express more than one preference in a ranked sense. And it allows me to not feel bad if my candidate is eliminated, that my vote still matters. And so it's really powerful that way. And at the same time, of course, if we, for example, want to vote for a third party candidate who has no chance of winning statistically, sometimes we have that feeling that our vote is wasted. But when you do ranked choice voting, of course, you can vote for that person. And then if they are eliminated, which is highly likely, your vote still counts because you can choose another candidate. And so we don't have to let go of all those other people. We're given an opportunity to still express our opinion, have a voice and a say. And it's a fantastic way to break past FOBO.
Think there are any other democratic innovations similar to ranked choice voting that could also help address some of these issues around FOBO, FOMO, and perhaps some of these other problematic intellectual processes that we're all afflicted with just by virtue of being human?
Yes, I do. I think one important thing that would really help is by creating fora whereby the comparison that's made between candidates isn't about 2-second snippets, but is actually much more substantive. Because of course, what happens, as I've talked about, a big part of decision paralysis, whether it's FOMO or FOBO, is that we're making decisions based on perceptions or information asymmetry. And so creating a national dialogue that's much more fact-based, where we can hold candidates to account, and where their 2-second or 15-second snippet that is not factual is actually then sort of checked real time. And it's less about sort of the one-line zingers and more about substantive policy. I think that will really help. And you combine that with something like ranked choice voting, where candidates are forced to try to appeal to as many people as possible because they want to be the second choice or the third choice. You bring those things together, and you can actually create a much more, a system that is much more flexible, that is much more focused on solutions, and that brings more people into the fold.
All right. Well, one of the things that I like to do, the way that I like to end these conversations, is by asking my guest if they have any optimistic thoughts about the future. So what is it right now that is making you optimistic about democracy in America?
It's a difficult time to be optimistic, but I am a pure optimist. And I'll tell you, I've been involved, as you are, with a group called Leadership Now, and I joined that group about 2 years ago, and I'm on the steering committee now. And it's a group of people who are business people who are looking to enact fundamental reforms to American democracy, not around a specific ideology. It's not about left, right, or center. It's about how we can make the electoral systems, the governance systems, everything, that the human capital in the system work better. And in doing so, and in being involved in this organization, what I've learned, and I did not know this before, is how much innovation is coming into the political sphere. We just talked about ranked choice voting, which is fantastic. Of course, to enact that kind of reform, you need people on the ground, you need organizations in the states at the federal level. You need thinkers, people like Catherine Gale and Michael Porter, who bring fresh ideas. You need organizations like yours that are bringing people together, and it's about messaging, it's about pragmatism, it's about finding solutions, it's about broadening the tent rather than excluding people. And so as I see that kind of work happening, I cannot help but be hopeful, because of course, entrepreneurs solve problems, and political entrepreneurs, as I call them, innovators in the political space, are problem solvers. They're pragmatic, they work together, and I think that they have a chance, especially in this difficult time, to make some real changes, because we do, the reality is you should never waste a crisis in order to fix things that are broken, right? The Chinese character for a crisis is also opportunity. And so we are in a crisis, but we also see opportunities all around us.
And so on that note, thank you, Patrick. Really appreciate having you on here. And I will look forward to continuing this conversation at another point.
Thank you, Uriel.
Thanks. Bye-bye.